For those that might not know my history, I grew up in church, and Brian and I have tried very hard not to have like overlong church services, but there was never a church service I was probably in that was under 2 hours or more. And so as a little kid, and a little kid who had a lot of ants in her pants, it was long. It was long. And so I vowed when I got to be in charge, which I know Brian's name's on the sign, but you know how it goes. That I was determined that my kids would be able to enjoy sitting through the times when they had to sit still. So I always had a basket of toys in the back of the church, and they were quiet ones, but I had them there. And I remember somebody coming in one day and they said, this place, and I said, oh, why? And they said, you got a basket of toys in the back of your church. So, and it's like, yeah. Kids are part of the, Jesus said, do not suffer the children, don't forbid them to come to me. And so I believe as part of our responsibility, and you guys have always been very great, you know, when some kids, they get a little more rambunctious or whatever, you've been awesome to always say, we want them here. And because I've told this story a few times, there was a couple that came and they had, of course, the perfect child. And they took one look at my 3 boys and they said, we can't stay here because you can't control your children. And it's like, yeah, well, time tells, because my kids all serve the Lord today. And it was, God honored me for having wild boys in church. So, so, and one of them's back there sitting at the back, and he's doing okay today. And 2 of them I know. He doesn't always want to acknowledge I'm his mother. So, anyway, before I start, I want to thank you guys, and I really mean this sincerely. That I really needed this song service this morning, and you know, song services don't happen. Worship doesn't happen unless people participate. And so when you look, you know, you look at the person speaking at front, you know, that they're doing the ministry. No, as a body, we do the ministry. And some days you walk in and life is doing good. And other days your life is totally in the bucket. And for us as a group of people to bring it so that there's a sense of presence in the place that God can minister to you, because He's the only one who knows what's going on the inside. Nobody else does. He's the only one who can touch you where no one else can touch you. And so I just want to thank you this morning for it. I'm sure part of it for me was being away last weekend. I had to help with the advance polls, and I just realized there was an energy drain by not being here for a Sunday. So just wanted to let you know how grateful I am this morning for it. So, you know, they often talk about giftings. People, you know, I've got the gift of discernment, or I've got the gift of prophecy, and that's very important when you get saved. It seems like God can impart things into our lives and develop it and grow it into something more. But there's also just plain natural giftings that people have, and I believe that I don't have any textbook on this, but I believe when we're born that God gives us a sort of some seeds put into our lives that can be developed into something more. Because I mean, you have kids, they're born. I had 3 boys, as I said. You know, the first one, the second one were totally opposites. So I kind of figured on the line there that with the third one, they'd be sort of in the middle. Well, I discovered you could have a third opposite. And you're thinking they're from the same genetic pool, but God was placing within them gifts and characteristic things that were unique to them. And, you know, you can have this baby that's going to be a small child. They're going to be stubborn. And people say, well, if you just do this, this, and this, and you got this other kid who's just absolutely a dream to raise. And you've done nothing wrong. It's their gifts, as long as we create them for the positive, are going to be what helps them in life. You know, a stubborn kid, you know, there's a part of you as a parent's like, but that same stubbornness done for the positive, they're not going to quit when everybody else quits. So it's, I remember for us, we prayed for that God would give us a leader. And with Dan, he did have very strong natural leadership ability. We were kind of thinking of a little bit of a Moses. I don't know what we were thinking of there, but it's a gift of being able to speak to groups of people, and that kid never shut up from the time he was born, basically. And it's like, you be careful what you ask for, because he was going to have to develop that gift. And I remember Paul Odger was in our life all that time, and Dan would follow him around, and he would just and he finally said to me, "Does that kid ever shut up?" And I said, "No, he's practicing, because his gift, right?" And then the last laugh was when Paul had his own, and you've never met a girl that talks faster than his daughter. So yeah. But anyway, to get back to the whole thing of spiritual giftings and natural giftings, a couple of weeks ago, I asked a group of young people, I said, what do you think you're good at? And that is a hard one to answer for any of us. But I know, particularly with young people today, they have been so taught negative instead of positive. I mean, you look at the girls that come out, and I mean, they personally, at 50 years old, I think they have a body to die for, and they think they have this terrible body, because I know my, sags and bags, because you get older, that's what happens. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with you? But they've been taught so negative that they see every little imperfection. And so they don't see anything good of value in them. And I think it's a question that we do need to ask our young people. What do you see that you're good at? What do you see of worth and value? And so, because I said to them, I said, it's really hard to do this for yourself. And so I had some very interesting answers, and I was trying to get to them. When you're really good at something, that's the way you need to look at how your life, you should be aiming in that direction. If you're no good at math, don't go to university to be an accountant, because obviously that's not the gift you have, right? So, and I mean, teen years are tough. There is no way around it. Teen years, they were tough when I was growing up. I still have vivid memories of going from the teen years to about age 30. And I really thought, because everybody said, the teen years are so tough. Nobody told me about the 20s. I finally named them, looking back, I call them the turbulent 20s. Because every major life decision is going to be made during those 20s. You're going to pick a partner. You're going to, want to start a family, do a career. There's so many shifts that happen during that time that cement the direction that you're going to go. So I get a chance, or I have in the past, worked with a lot of college-age kids, and I say to them, you guys, you're all excited. I'm finally in my 20s, sort of thing. And I said, I'm just warning you ahead. There's going to be a lot of shifts that take place here, and don't panic, because 30 does come. And so I said to them, for me, it was around age 30, and I've asked different people that I had a clearer picture of who I was, what I was good at, what I wasn't good at, that sort of thing. So one of the things, the gifts that I realized that I had been given, was a gift of organization. And I will tell you right now, that was definitely not Brian's gifting. He's learned over the years coping strategies, because he has so much on his plate to do, but it's not a natural gifting for him. I discovered that I actually had a natural gifting for it. As I said before, you're born with, you aren't born with a fully developed gift, though. I play the piano. You have no idea the hundreds and hundreds of hours in my life that I have dedicated to play it there. I was not playing that the day I started. But obviously there was a seed of music that was there, and then it was, as I said, developed in a lot of ways. But when I talk about the gift of being developed, organizational skills weren't evident in even my teen years. I think my kids would be shocked to have seen me in my high school years. I was late for many things. I was, my assignments were last minute. Everything that you wouldn't see me today be. And probably part of it was because I came from a disorganized home. So there was nobody to kind of guide that gift that was there. But you know what? Whether the family knew it or not, God knew that it was there. And through, so he developed it in me through a journey of situations that I didn't want to be in, but it was like sink or swim. And it through process of time, and I'll just tell you, work was definitely involved with it. But I didn't realize that God was developing me to the gift there to a higher potential for what I was going to need to do in life. And I have to be honest. Not all have appreciated my gift of organization. You just ask my boys. It just drove them crazy because mom had, was trying to organize their lives in that. And so, but other people, you would see situations and thinking, I can help them. I could, fix that. So because of that, and there would be a negative response back to it. I've learned over the years to be selective in who I share that gift with. Brian, he's stuck with it. He can't help it. But having said all of that, there were people in my life, and there have been enough people in my life who've appreciated the skill, that they've begged me to help them organize their lives. And some of it I've helped them out. Just as a friend or whatever. Some have actually paid me to come and help them. And no, I'm not taking any clients on right now, but I'm talking obviously in the physical end of things, the clutter and all of that happens in people's lives. Brian sorts them out emotionally and spiritually. That's his area of natural gifting. But I can tell you this, none of it is an easy task. It is just, it's not an easy task, either physically, emotionally, or spiritually. It's work. And so often when I've gone to help someone, I'm just being honest here, I am overwhelmed inside by the amount of stuff that has to be dealt with, because we're talking years and years of stuff. And I try not to show it on but inside, I do a quick prayer. I'm like, God, I need help. I don't even know where to start here, And so even though the gift's there, it's overwhelming. So I say the quick prayer, I take a deep breath, I roll up my sleeves, and I begin to help to sort and organize that person's world. And I have learned over the years not to do it for them. I will be beside, I will help them guide, but we'll only get back in that mess if they're not part of the participation. But I've said all this because one of the things that I have noted when helping a person sort their world out is that the stuff that is accumulated in their home, their workplace, whatever it is that we are going to have to deal with, did not happen overnight. You don't go to bed with and to sleep in an organized room and you wake up and there's boxes everywhere and you can't climb over everything. It didn't happen overnight. It took time. And so, I was helping someone not that long ago, and this is kind of where this message began to birth, because I watched everything we were dealing with. And I realized that everything that had come through their door at their place was a result of a decision. The first decision that you have is whether or not the item even comes through the door. Then, and I have to say this carefully, because there are some cases you don't get a choice. Now, I am talking physical right now, but I am going to shift to the spiritual things. There are things that you have a choice whether it comes through your life, your door. But there are other things you don't get a choice. It's landed on your doorstep and you have to deal with it. And I kind of teased Brian there that I remember years ago, he got into his big night out was going to an auction sale on a Friday night. And I knew as sure as the sun would rise the next day, there would be a bunch of boxes that we would have to deal with because I didn't get a choice. He was bringing them home. Although I will tell you, one time he bought something and he told me he drove around a long time before he got home because he bought something we couldn't afford. And anyway, we're still married. So, but I'm just saying that there are things that you get the choice, but there are things you don't have the choice and you still have to deal with it. But once it's inside, then the next decision is, where am I going to put it? And the third decision is, am I going to deal with it now or am I going to deal with it later? And do you know what the answer tends to be for a lot of people? You're right. If we did a family feud, that would be the number one answer: later. You ever heard the term mañana? Mañana is Spanish for the word tomorrow. But really what it means is sometime undesignated future. Well, have you ever heard the thing, mañana never comes? Because that's what it is. So each indecision actually becomes a decision. If you don't deal with it, it's going to deal with you. So, and stuff starts piling up until your molehill becomes the mountain. And it's an overwhelming task to deal with. And at this point, maybe it's just my own sense of humor here, when all of a sudden you have a mountain of stuff to deal with, which should have been dealt with when it was coming in the door as a small amount. We Christians want to quote Jesus' promise in Mark chapter 11, verse 23. And it says, he says, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and cast in the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. I would love to go into my home that looks like a goat exploded in it and just quote this and sort of zap and it's all gone. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. Especially things that are of our own doing. And you don't grow if God does all the work for you. I'm not talking about salvation here, because salvation was a gift. God gave it. It's a free gift. We can't work for that. It's a done deal. But once we receive Christ into our lives, there is work to be done. I always like to liken it when Brian talked about one time, and it caught my heart. I was talking about working out your salvation. Well, that didn't make sense mixed with grace. Grace is God's free gift, and then it talks about working out your salvation. Working out your salvation is when the children of Israel, God gave them the land. He says, it's yours. But then he says, you have to go in and possess the land. And he worked alongside of them to deal with the land. But he wasn't going to give them you can sit back and let me do it all for you. And in our lives, we become Christians, and then God says, okay, now I'm going to work with you to help clear your land. And he gives the power to do it as well, because when you don't have him with you, you can't deal with that stuff. So some biblical examples of people not dealing with their stuff in their lives. And I just wanted to spend a few minutes to kind of look at it. I guess you could call this a sort of an adult Sunday school class, at least a partial of it. But the very first one, because I was sitting back and thought, God, who are some of the people in the Bible that did not deal with their stuff when they should have? And the story of Cain and Abel, right at the very start in Genesis. You had Adam and Eve, and then they had two sons, and they were called Cain and Abel. And in Genesis chapter 4, in this latter part of verse 2, right to verse 7, and I'm reading from the NIV version, and it says, now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. It says, Then the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. God was giving him a decision. This has been landed on his doorstep. And he says, you need to make a decision here, because if you don't, sin is crouching at the door for you. And, if you don't deal with it, it will bite you. And the end of the story was Cain chose to deal with it in a wrong way. And it caused the murder of his brother. And then you have another one, which seems maybe like an odd one. You have Moses. And I loved a message Brian spoke years ago. He said, he called it serpent on a stick. And I've never forgot it. I guess I think of it almost like a shish kebab sort of thing. But and they should have had a barbecue with this serpent on a stick when it was done. But in Numbers chapter 21, verse 6-9, you have the children of Israel complaining about God. His provision, they don't like it, blah, blah, blah. And when I read that as a kid, I used to think, oh, those terrible people. And then I've caught myself, God, I really like something different or whatever. And it's like, God, I'm so sorry, because it's in all of us to do. But they were complaining about God's provision. And so in Numbers 21, verse 6-9, it says, Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them, and they bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, We sinned when we spoke against God and against you. Pray that the Lord will take snakes away from us. So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live. So Moses made a bronze snake and put it on a pole. Then when anyone was... That is positive. It's sort of a picture of what will happen when Jesus was on the cross. And he said, if you've been bitten by sin, which all of us have, he says, you look to me and I will heal you. That's positive, okay? Because as a kid, that was just a weird story when I was younger. But I understood the picture as time went on. But that is not the end of that story with the serpent on a stick. And you would miss it because it seems like a very small verse in the Bible later on. That the people had a problem, which was sin. God gave them an answer, which was to look to this serpent on a pole. But after a while, that serpent on a pole actually became a problem. And we find out about the problem in King Hezekiah's day. King Hezekiah, that's like several hundred years later from when this incident happened. And so in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 3-4, it talked about Hezekiah because there had been some bad kings happening in Judah, Israel. And so God had a good king come along. And this good king, Hezekiah, it says he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made, for up to that time the Israelites had been burning incense to it. All that time, they kept that. That was something they should have cleaned out their closet a long time ago, because it was a temporary thing. It was not supposed to be their idol, but they kept it. And again, there's so much that you can take out of that. Sometimes people worship the method of something that was needed back a long time ago, but they keep it. It's like an untouchable thing. You got to keep it because this is what happened back then. It was for that time and that time alone. And you can imagine that they were probably pretty upset with Hezekiah because, I mean, this is a historic relic. And it's like, no, it has to go because it's become a stumbling block. They're using worship for this when God never intended this. So then you have the story of Achan. That was another one that I was thinking about. Somebody who did not deal with things the way he should have. And that's in Joshua chapter 7. Story of Achan. Israel has just entered the promised land. They had an incredible victory with the first city they went to, which was Jericho. And what God said about Jericho, he said, don't touch anything, because the rules back then, they had the spoils of war, whatever you found you could keep, and it increase your wealth. But he said, the first city you take, I don't want you to touch anything. It all belongs to me. There's a sermon right there too, isn't there? The first belongs to God, and then you can have the rest. But anyway, there was a guy who did not listen. His name was Achan. But nobody knew that Achan had not listened. So they confidently went out to the next town to take care of it. And it was Ai, and it was a small town, so they didn't even bother sending all their troops. Like, we'll have a rest. We'll just send a few guys out there. And they were thoroughly trounced. And they came back. It's like, oh, what's happening? God says, somebody did something. They dealt with something. They went and took some stuff that I told them that you guys weren't supposed to do. You see, and what happened was Achan admitted. He says, yeah, I took one of the garments and I took some gold and I buried it under my tent. And I said to Brian, I always wondered, what was he going to do with that garment? It's not like he can wear it out in public because they'll all know. So he hid it. And even though nobody else knew about it, God knew about it. And it had to be dealt with. And because Achan did not deal with it right, his family paid a very high price for it, as well as his friends and family around him because of doing it. People did die in that first battle of Ai. So then you have Gideon, and Gideon, he was a guy who didn't want to ruffle any feathers. He was one of those types of guys. And God called him and he says, I'm going to have you take on the enemy that had enslaved Israel again at that time. And so because Gideon was willing to listen to God and follow his direction, again, an incredible supernatural miracle took place, and a very small army of 300 guys went and took on thousands and thousands of guys. And there was incredible victory. But at the end of the victory, again, the spoils of war, they were the guys, Gideon said to them, he says, look, just give me a gold earring from your booty, bounty, whatever. And he says, and you can have the rest. So they did. They gave him this gold earring. And this is what it says with those gold earrings. In Judges chapter 8, verse 27, it said, Gideon made the gold into an ephod. Now, there are some people, biblical scholars, you know what an ephod is, but the average Joe on the street, if you go ask them, what's an ephod? They go, what? And an ephod, when I was being trained in Bible college, they focused on this. It was sort of like a vest that the priest wore. In their understanding, there was like two stones, Urim and Thummim or Thummim, something like that. And their understanding, to the best they know, they would inquire of the Lord with this vest, with the priest using it. And it would kind of like, God, should we go to battle? So it would be sort of a yes-no question. So the one that would glow would be God's answer, basically, to the situation. So and it was supposed to only be used by priests, but there are other places in the Bible when it talks about an ephod, it doesn't make sense. And this is one of them. When Gideon, it says, he made an ephod out of all this gold. And so there's two meanings in the Old Testament. One was the garment worn for the priest, but then the other most likely was an image or an idol. So don't want to go into the deeper details of that, but just understand that the ephod that they were talking about was some sort of image or idol. And it says he made the ephod. It says which he placed in Ophrah, his town. And it says all Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. You see a pattern here from here to the bronze snake? It's like it doesn't seem, whatever happens, they're going to go and worship this. They're going to say, this is what did this for us. And again, Gideon, if he saw that, he should have dealt with it. It's going in the junk sale, it's going in the garbage, whatever, but he didn't. And although the land lived in peace for a while, he saw that all happening, and it became a snare to him and his family because of it. So another person that didn't deal with things well, King David. I've already kind of mentioned him slightly, but King David, he had a family situation that came up that should have been dealt with. He was the king, he was the father of the situation, and it should have been dealt with. And that was, he had his oldest son, and his oldest son fell in love with a half-sister. I mean, that sounds really weird today, but back then it wasn't, I guess, the same way. But instead of the older son kind of dealing with himself, he went and raped her, and David did nothing about it at all. So the girl, her brother, who was Absalom, he took care of it. And it took him a couple of years so that he could get his brother Ammon in a situation where that he murdered him. And he got everybody to kind of participate a little in that. And David, that should never have escalated to that point, because David just ignored it. He never did a thing about it, and he knew about it. And so, again, by doing nothing, you already made the decision for it. And there was a lot more history between David and Absalom. Not sure if it would have got to that point, because it got pretty bad before Absalom died, and not at David's hand. David didn't want him dead, but at least that situation, David should have done something, and he didn't. And so it became a much even bigger issue than it should have been. And then there's King Solomon, and some people go like, well, what did he do wrong? King Solomon, he had all his wives, and I mean, he had like 1,000 wives. That's a lot of wives, and women on top of that, concubines and that. And he had incredible wealth. There's never been anybody more wealthy than he was in the entire world. And so, although Brian, I was telling him about, talking to him about this, Solomon, he had all these wives and this wealth. And he said, honey, that's like a dichotomy in that sentence. He says, wealth and wives don't work. Because he used to always say that when he was married, or when he was a bachelor, he had all this money. And then when he married me, it all disappeared. So that's it. But he does like to brag that he gets his allowance. So, Solomon did everything that Moses, before he died, he predicted certain things. He said, if this happens, and this is going to happen. And it was like God was warning them ahead of time. There are things that are going to happen in your nation, and you have choices and decisions that are going to be made to which way you're going to go on this. And so for Solomon, this is what Moses had said, even though Moses had lived long before him. He says, if Israel has a king one day, because they didn't have kings back then, Deuteronomy 17:17, he said, he must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. Exactly what Moses said happened to Solomon. He had all those wives, and they were like, agreements with other countries, that sort of thing. But the wives wanted their own gods, so he built shrines and temples for all of them. And it said they got him participating in what they did. And so it says he must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. And here's he said, he must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. But he didn't listen. And do you know that Solomon's kingdom, it rose to a certain point, but you knew things weren't totally right, because when his son came to power, the people came to him and said, if you will stop taxing us the way your father did, we will serve you, but if you don't, we leave. And the boy didn't listen, and so that's when Israel broke up. But it never had the same level of power or whatever else. It impacted the people of the kingdom, and it impacted Solomon's family because of it. So it was, again, he never should have let the junk in the door, and he had a choice. He was a king. He could have done what he wanted there. So what does the Bible say about dealing with the stuff in your life? And remember, as I said, sometimes we have the choice, and sometimes there's stuff that's thrusted upon us. We have no choice. You know, like you get bad news of a health report, or you know, there's a family situation that's out of your control, and you're still sucked into it. What are you going to deal with it? How are you going to deal with it? One of the things that happens once a month here is communion service. And around that, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, when Brian, reads the scripture, and that's where it comes from, to have your bread and break the body and the wine and stuff. But one of the things that is in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 28, Paul, who wrote about this, he gave instruction. He says, everyone ought to examine themselves before they eat of the bread and drink from the cup. Basically, in modern words, what he was saying, you need to deal with your stuff. You're the only one who can deal with this. But he says you need to deal with it before you partake. And for some people, it's, like people's, you only have to deal with your stuff once a month, because that's when we do it. I mean, you've got the Anglican Church, they have it every week, so got to deal with it, once a week, which, I mean, that's better than nothing. But you have here with Jesus, with the Sermon on the Mount, he had a big, long sermon, a lot of people listening in. That's sort of, around Matthew chapter 5. Matthew's the first book in the New Testament. But it's Matthew chapter 5, verse 23 and 24. This is what Jesus said about dealing with your stuff. He says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. He's like, it's really, really important. Deal with your stuff. I'll still be waiting for you here. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. Ephesians 4, Ephesians 4, verse 26. This is the NIV Bible. He says, in your anger, do not sin. He wasn't saying that you there's times that you are angry, and I mean, it says God can get angry and he doesn't sin. So it's not about the anger being sin. But he says, do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. The sun goes down, that's every day. It says, and I have to say this, if you find yourself still getting angry about things that happened in the past, you haven't dealt with it. And I can tell you from my personal experience in life, you're going to have a wrestling match on your hands. But I do know that God, he and I, hand in hand, dealt with some stuff. And I can honestly say it was dealt with. So when you find your mind starting to wander to things of the past, and you find that anger, and it's just below the belt, God says you need to deal with this. Because in the end, it's only destroying you. It destroys your family. The Message Bible I like here, Ephesians 4:26. It says, "Go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry, but don't use your anger as fuel for revenge. And don't stay angry. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil that kind of foothold in your life." Remember the story we started out with Cain and Abel? That's what happened. God said, you need to deal with this, Cain, because if you don't deal with it, sin is crouching at your door. So, what are the results from dealing with the junk in your life? It's like, I want some benefits here, Pam. And I will tell you right now, there is nothing more freeing than letting it go. Satan wants to tell you that it's a friend, to keep it close to you because you nurse it. It feels good. It seems to feel good to keep that anger nursed. But it actually is way more freeing to get rid of it. Because this is what Jesus said. He says, if you deal with the junk in your life, Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 to 30, again, the NIV Bible, he says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He never intended for you to carry the weight of the world. And there are times in my life I have felt like I have been carrying the weight of the world, and he's standing there saying, I never asked this of you. I'm here to carry it for you. Matthew chapter 11, 29 to 30. And again, I'm using the Message Bible because I just loved how it said it. This is what God says. He says, walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Learn from him. It's learning how to not carry all the junk that gets in your life. It's just like everyday living. It does show up at your door. And advice from a personal organizer to a spiritual organizer, you get rid of it as it comes. Deal with it. Next day, you may have to deal with it again because it's in your face again. You deal with it, deal with it, deal with it until it's taken care of. It's not letting it pile up. I always have the picture of a turtle, they carry all of their belongings on their back. We weren't designed for that. Turtle has his house on his back. We don't have to have it on our back. It's decision time because, as I said, mañana doesn't happen if we leave it till tomorrow. I like in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse, the latter part of 2, when Paul says, now is the time of favor, now is the day of salvation. He says you don't have to put it off dealing with the stuff because it becomes a problem. They say that the best time to plant a tree was 40 years ago because then you get to reap the benefit of it today. But the next best time is today. You might feel overwhelmed at the amount that you have to deal with. As I said, when I walk into a situation, it's like, God, this is too over. I can't. You want to shut down and not do any of it. But we've been given the greatest organizer in the world. It's not me. It's him. He says, I can help you. I can. In Matthew, again, the chapter 11, verse 29 and 30 with the Message Bible, he says, walk with me. Work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't let anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And so this morning I felt, and I know we don't always do it, but I did feel this morning, so I wanted to do it. Lee, if you could just put a little music on. At least give you the opportunity. Because what happens when you go out that door, you got 50 million things waiting for you, and your mind gets distracted and you don't think of this again. But God was speaking to me. He says, I want to give people at least an opportunity to come to me and just say, God, here I am. Here it is. You know what I'm dealing with. And I just want to give it to you. And then give him permission, because what Brian said this morning, that permission is what God needs to work with us. He will not override your will. So that's why it's important that we give him permission. Not everything's going to happen here. I'll tell you that right now. There's an initial, it feels good. You still have to go and face all this stuff. But if you give him permission, then he says, walk with me. I'll teach you how to deal with it. It's a process. But I can guarantee you at the end of it, he says, you'll feel good. You'll feel free. There'll be other stuff that comes along. But I find with this stuff, it's like a magnet. It's like when I watch people when they get angry or bitter, boy, they can just draw more and more of that in. Instead of deal with it, and then when the other stuff comes in that's going to bring anger or bitterness or whatever it's going to deal with, you can deal with it because you're not dealing with the whole pile. So I'm just giving this morning, and Brian and I can pray with you if you want or not. Or you can sit in your chair. That's cool too. But I just wanted to give, 3, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is you need. I just asked Leah to have the music playing. And if you want us to pray with you, just kind of put your hand up, or if you come up here or whatever, then we'll do it. But don't rush out. I mean, lunch is still like a half an hour away for you anyway. For you guys, Susan's out there babysitting, so gives you the free time. You don't get that much, I'm sure, with all those kids. But we won't tell her that it's done yet. But give yourselves that time to just say, God, just search me. Just search me. And if I got stuff I deal with, help me to deal with it so that I can walk what you say, that you walk, feel good, and walk free.